Now, in the previous session, we talked about the essentials of a good control system. We saw what is required in order to ensure that the control system of the organization is effective. And then we saw about the importance of control, why we should have controlling in the organization. And we also saw the different areas that are covered by the function of controlling or the scope of controlling system. Okay, so we saw some 10 areas that are covered by controlling. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the principles of control. So different principles are going to be provided by different authors based upon their own researches. So we just have some 7 principles here. Okay, so based upon these researches, these principles that are mentioned here is accumulation or accumulative study of different authors, okay, of different researchers. So some of the principles, the first principle is the principle of reflection of plans. Now, planning and controlling are two sides of the same coin. They go hand in hand. We've seen already how planning is where the standards are set and controlling is where the standards are compared and controlled, okay, and where we find any deviations and all and we change them. So if a firm has, or if the organization, it has a clear and complete plan, then it becomes a lot easier also to make the control system for the plan, because if we know exactly what the standards are set, then it becomes easier to figure out what we can do, what the changes can be made in case of the controlling function. So a well-integrated plan will mean that the controlling system of the organization, the controlling system of the firm, will be more effective. Okay, so point number 2 is principle of prevention. Now, when it comes to principle of prevention, we have the concept which follows: prevention is better than cure. It is rather better to make changes before any problems occur. So we say that the system of controlling must not only focus on improving the deficiencies and solving the deviations from the standards. Okay, it should not only concentrate upon saying, okay, these are the problems and we're going to change them in the future. Okay, it's instead of that, they should focus also on preventing mistakes and deviations from the plan. In fact, because they're able to study the past, they should try to predict the future, like this problem may happen, these are the steps we should take. Okay, so they should be trying to prevent mistakes and deviations from the plan. And if there are very few shortfalls in the first place, then the remedial action necessary will be limited and manageable, because with the help of controlling, if they are able to try to reduce the problems, then the amount of deviation will be less. If the deviation is less, then remedial action also be limited or lesser. And then you have the third principle, we can see, principle of efficiency of control. Now, if the company, it goes overboard with setting up of a control system, then it could be harmful for the company itself in the long run. If it goes overboard, in a sense, it becomes very extensive, very expensive, right? So if it goes overboard, it could be harmful rather than beneficial for the firm. So a very extensive control system can be expensive, and the cost benefits also can disappear. Cost benefits, in a sense, the costs will outweigh the benefits, meaning you've put up a controlling system to reduce the cost, but instead it increases the cost. Okay, so the cost benefits will disappear. So it's very important that there is efficiency in the approach and the techniques also of a controlling system, and any deviations from the plan, any mistakes, any shortfall, all of the causes also, they must be detected at the minimum cost and also without any unforeseen consequences. Meaning, if there are any mistakes, we should notice them as soon as possible, and we should also ensure that these mistakes they're not too costly for the firm. Okay, they are not too expensive, or they don't have any extra consequences, so as to say. So the controlling system, it should be cost beneficial to the company, and it's not just in terms of money, but also in terms of being safe for the individuals or the personnel in the firm, meaning any problems that are being made, the cost control should not be that one mistake means you have to fire the individual immediately. Okay, so it should be beneficial, not just in terms of money, but also they should try to avoid adverse human consequences. And then we have principle number 4, which is principle of responsibility. Now, responsibility for control, in case of responsibility for control, we have these measurement of deviations and then taking corrective actions. Also, all this should be given to specific individuals at each stage of the operation. What it means is that when it comes to controlling, different individuals should be given this particular responsibility. For example, in case of the low level, in case the employees at the low level make a mistake, then the low level manager should be able to make the controlling decisions. Okay, should have the responsibility for making the controlling decisions. And then we have point number 5, principle of uniformity. So when we're talking about uniformity, it means everything should be somewhat more or less the same. Okay, something should be uniform. So the purpose of every business, of course, is to get the best performance possible. Now, the principle of uniformity, it will require the presentation of data, the presentation of different information regarding the firm, all these figures, the reports for controlling purposes in terms of the organizational structure. So the principle of uniformity between the authority and responsibility must be followed if we want to have some kind of a level or uniform treatment of everything. And the next is the principle of comparison. Now, a good control system must provide for quick comparisons so that the manager is in a position to attend to any kind of possible trouble. In a sense, they should be able to have a quick comparison between the standard and between the actual, and once they're able to compare these quickly, they'll be able to attend to them as soon as possible. So it helps to find out deviations and mistakes at the earliest, and it'll also try to predict any kind of future results. So for comparison purposes, the figures and reports used in controls should be in similar terms. Okay, so it should not be like one will be measured in terms of money, another will be measured in terms of units. Okay, it should be somewhat similar in nature. And the last principle we have is principle of utility. You should be useful. Now, when we're talking about utility, the principle implies that the importance of or the value of reports for control changes directly with the suitability of the period covered by reports, keeping in view the purpose of control. Okay, how much it can be used. So for the period, for the accounting purpose, let's say for the accounting year 20 to 21, only the reports for 2021 will only be useful for making any changes to deviations in 2021. Now, if there are any further deviations in the next year, let's say for 21-22, then that will be covered under the reports for that year. Okay, so with utility, the concept of unity should also be there, not just to be useful, but it should be united. So a manager can be successful in controlling by further uniting the ideas of people around him. Okay, so that's why we're saying utility should also have unity. So this interaction is a psychological aspect, in fact, of controlling, and the controlling system should be acceptable to the persons who are being controlled. As we've studied earlier, we've said that controlling system is mainly for employees, therefore, it should be flexible in nature, and additionally, it should also be for the human resources as well, right? Because there's going to be psychological pressure. That is why when it comes to controlling, it should be accepted by the people who are being controlled. Okay, so these are the 7 principles we have of controlling. And then you have different types of critical standards. Now, when we're talking about critical standards, these are standards or yardsticks. Okay, remember, standards are the yardsticks or the base on which the actual or the expected performances are going to be measured. Now, even though the manager will try to control to carry out control through personal observation, but it may not always be possible because of the complexity of operations. Okay, you cannot just say, okay, this doesn't look good, so I'll change it. Instead of that, instead of just personal observation, you should also have some kind of standards or some kind of yardsticks that you should follow. So the control points to be selected should be critical. There being either limiting factors or of showing better than other factors whether plans are working out or not. So the critical points should be selected carefully so that they help in performing the controlling function properly. Okay, so we have some 7 standards here. The first standard is that of physical standard. Now, physical standards are basically non-monetary measurements, and they are common mostly at the operating level. So when we're talking about physical standards, they represent the quantitative performance. Okay, they represent quantitative performance, something you can see, such as how much hours you've put into a particular unit of output, okay, and how much fuel has been used in a particular machinery, how much miles have been covered by the carriage, and then how many units have been produced by a machine. Okay, so physical standards generally, remember, are things that we can see, we can cover, we can record. Okay, So they also may reflect things such as hardness of the bearings, and then closeness of tolerance, durability of a fabric, fastness of a color, and so on. Okay, these are just some small examples, but mostly physical standards are non-monetary. They're usually at the lower level, and additionally they are for quantitative performances. Okay, something we can see, something we can quantify, something we can calculate in numbers. And then you have cost standards. So cost, of course, from the name itself, it should be relating to money. Okay, so physical, remember, are non-monetary, whereas cost standards are going to be monetary measurements. And again, these are common at your operating levels. Now, when we're coming to costs, costs can be either direct costs or indirect costs. Okay, so this is very important. They can be direct costs or indirect costs, and these are costs pertaining to the units that have been produced, then the labor cost per unit. If you have overheads, then overhead expenses per unit, material cost per unit, and then the cost of sales per unit, and so on and so forth. Okay, so the estimated costs determined, which have been fixed earlier or set earlier, will be compared to actual costs for finding out the performance. Okay, so cost standard is relating to monetary measurements. They are again at the operating level, and they can be subdivided into direct and indirect costs, and they can constitute all the costs involved on your okay, your labor costs, material costs, then machinery costs, any other overhead costs, and so on. And then you have capital standards. Now, capital standards arise from the usage of monetary measurements of physical items. Okay, capital standards arise from the application of monetary measurements of physical items. Now, these standards are concerned with the capital invested in the firm, and the most commonly used capital standard is your return on investment. So we have other capital standards involved, like your current assets ratio, which is the ratio of current assets to current liabilities, and then debt equity ratio, right, your total debt to your net worth, and then cash ratio, and various other ratios that you've already heard of. Okay, so capital standards is nothing more than determining how the money is going to be measured with regards to your physical items. Okay, comparing the benefits of using money on your physical items. And then you have your revenue standards. Now, revenue standards arise from attaching monetary values to sales. How much revenue are you getting? How much from your sales, how much money are you getting back? Okay, what is the revenue you're earning? These are termed as your revenue standards. Now, these standards may include everything pertaining to sales, like your average sales per customer, sales per capita, and so on and so forth. And then we have point number 5, which is your program standards. Now, there may be some kind of a special program for specific work to be performed, such as developing a new product, and then a program for improving the quality of sales force, some kind of an orientation or a help development program to ensure that the sales personnel are working better. Okay, so anything that will help to improve the working development of the employees within the organization, or of any other resources within the organization. So in appraising the program performance, some subjective kind of judgment may also be applied. So some factors like timing and cost, they may be used as objective standards when it comes to program standards. And then you have intangible standards. Intangibility refers to something that cannot be seen, cannot be touched, cannot be smelled. Okay, it is something you cannot see at all, no physical existence. So it's very difficult to set standards when it comes to intangible existence, because they are not expressed in either physical or monetary measures. It is very difficult to determine also, for example, when it comes to intangible standards like the loyalty of people. Okay, the loyalty of people, the motivational aspect of people, how much people like a job. These are things you cannot see or touch, but they depend upon your senses, right? So these cannot be expressed either in physical or monetary terms. Therefore, they're very difficult to determine. So like loyalty of a manager to the firm, or the public relations of your personnel. And then it's not possible to set any kinds of objective standards if the performance cannot be measured quantitatively. Okay, you cannot say that you must be 10% loyal, you must be 20% loyal, must be 30% loyal, because you cannot see the loyal level, right? Because you cannot measure it, you cannot measure in terms of numbers. Therefore, intangible standards is a very difficult measurement in case of your controlling. And then you have goals as standards. Point number 7, goals as standards. Now, with the help of research and thinking, modern managers feel that they can define goals, which can be used as performance standards. So, with quantitative techniques, goals can be fixed, as have been discussed, whether physical, cost, capital standards, revenue, program. Okay, with the help of quantitative techniques, goals can be fixed as any of these above standards, and the definitions of quantitative goals represent a very important development in the area of standards. Okay, with the help of research and thinking, with the help of various studies, modern managers feel that they can change the entire definition of goals, and they can make them as performance standards as such. Okay, so these are the 7 types of critical standards we have in most of the firms. All right, so let's look at your next slide. The next slide talks about designing the control system, how to create a control system. Now, designing a control system will provide an accurate and timely feedback, and this is not going to be a very easy exercise. Okay, so the main thing to be decided when it comes to designing a control system will be to determine what is to be controlled and how often the progress needs to be measured. Okay, what is to be controlled and how often the progress should be measured. Now, trying to control too many different elements of the work or of the operations too strictly may lead to demoralization and demotivation of employees, and as such, it may, instead of doing good for the organization, it may not serve the cause, it may be bad for the organization. So managers may focus on easy to measure factors, and this may not help to control the process as such, but we still have some 3 factors here which should be kept in mind no matter what while designing a control system. Okay, so first point is identifying key performance errors. Now, whenever you're trying to, like example, let's say when you're trying to study also, when you're trying to study, you're going to first identify which papers or which topics are easier to deal with, and you may be able to, which are the topics you may be able to handle, which you may be able to understand. So you'll be dealing with those areas in detail. Okay, so these are termed as your key performance areas, the place where you're going to give most of your attention. So in case of a firm also, key performance areas are those aspects of the organization or of the unit that must function effectively for the entire unit to succeed. Because when it comes to, let's say, when it comes to accounting, if you do not know the golden rules of accounting, right? Debit the receiver, credit the giver, all those for personal account, real account, and all that. If you do not know those golden rules of accounting, you'll not be able to proceed towards the creation of your journal entry. Now, if you're not able to write your journal entries, you won't be able to prepare your ledgers. If you're not able to prepare your ledgers, you won't be able to prepare your balance sheet, which is what is required to know the status of the firm, right? So here also, the key performance areas are those aspects of the organization which must function effectively for the entire unit to succeed. So these areas will usually require, or they may usually involve major organizational activities or groups of related activities that would occur throughout the organization. Okay, so they usually have some kinds of activities which are throughout the organization, not just at the top level, but middle level, lower level as well. So the identification or figuring out these key areas will help to decide detailed control systems as well as standards. So some of the key performance areas in any organization could be production, and then personnel. These are very important. Marketing also is important. Finance and accounting. So these are the main areas that are required in any organization, without which the organization might fail. So in production, the standards may relate to quality, quantity, cost of production, individual job performance, and so on and so forth. Okay, these are just examples. And then point number 2, identifying strategic control points. Okay, so once you've figured out the key performance areas, the second point is to identify strategic control points, which are the points we can control. Okay, make a strategy. So in addition to identifying the performance areas, it is also essential to identify control points. Now, of course, it may not be possible to control each and everything. So because of that, it may result in spending time on those elements which are not strategic, and important control points may get less action. So sometimes because the managers may try to control everything that is within their grasp, so at some point of time, they may forget that there are some things that do not require controlling. Okay, some things that are not exactly very important if they want to achieve the organizational goal. So in that situation, managers should identify strategic control points in the system at which monitoring or collecting information should occur. Now, usually only a small percentage of the activities, events, individuals, or objectives in a given operation will account for a higher proportion of the expenses or the problems that the managers will have to face. Okay, usually it's not the entire firm that they have to control, but just a small percentage of different activities, events, or the personnel, or some kinds of objectives that are there within a specific job that they have to control, or that they will have to take note of. Okay, so strategic control points should be identified in the dealings that they are carrying out in the day-to-day working of the organization. And then the third point to keep in mind is organizational communication. Now, communication is very important in any relationship, right? So similarly, in case of an organization also, communication is very important, especially when it comes to the relationship between the superior and the subordinate. So the organization, it will have to design a effective communication network. Okay, it has to design a very effective communication network to carry the control information both upward and downward. Upward from the subordinate to superior, and downward from the superior to the subordinate. A superior should be able to convey the control standards and the performance yardsticks to the subordinates downwards. And when it comes to upward communication, it'll be required to get information about the actual performance by the subordinates. Okay, so downward communication is when they're telling what are standards to be followed, and upward communication is when the subordinates will be saying, we did this much job, we did that much work. Okay, so any organization, it'll depend largely upon the communication set up for exercising control at different levels. And in the absence of a good communication system, there may be confusion about the standards that have been set and the actual results that have been achieved. Okay, so that's why we're saying we require a very good communication, or a very good organizational communication system. And then proper communication system is in fact a prerequisite for the success of any control system. Okay, so these are the key elements required when designing any control system. All right, so let's move on to the next topic, which is limitations of controlling. So some of the limitations of control, we have just some 5 limitations. Of course, there could be more depending upon where you're reading from, but I just have 5 here. Okay, so firstly, influence of external factors. Now, whatever happens, like in case, like for now, so when I'm recording this class, there are so many external factors at play. External factors in the sense, somebody could be shouting there, my cats could be running, could be screaming, right? Like my neighbors could be shouting. Okay, and these are the external factors which I cannot control. So there may be an effective control system in the organization, but the external factors which are not in the ambit, or which are not in the control of the management, may have adverse effect on the working of the organization. Okay, you may have a very effective control system, but despite that, there are external factors which are not under the purview, which are not under the control of the management, which could affect the working of the organization. So these factors, when it comes to the organization, could be your government policies, and then changes in technology, changes in fashion, changes in taste of your customers. Okay, all of these factors will influence the organization, and they cannot be checked by the control system in the organization. And then point number 2 is expensive. Now, again, we've been saying that we should have a control system that is cost beneficial to the organization. It should not be too expensive, but at the same time, we should not give up on something that is expensive if it's going to be giving you a lot of return. Okay, a lot of benefit. So control system will generally involve huge expenditure on a exercise. The performance of each and every person in the organization will have to be measured and reported to higher authorities. And when you're preparing a report, you'll be requiring some kind of software. When you're printing, you'll be requiring all kinds of hardware. You'll be requiring all kinds of you'll be requiring printers, paper, right? Everything is expensive. Therefore, controlling in sense, it's going to be quite expensive in nature. So it requires a large number of people also to be employed, not just your machinery, but also individuals. So if the performance cannot be quantitatively measured, then it'll be observed by the superiors. And the exercise of control will require, again, both time and effort. Time to do all of your work, and effort to create all of your reports. And then the third limitation is lack of satisfactory standards. Now, the performance of certain activities involving human behavior cannot be fixed in terms of quantities. When it comes to humans, you cannot measure angry at level 5, angry at level 2, sad at level 10, depressed at level 0, right? You cannot measure them, you cannot put any kinds of numbers to them. So it's quite difficult to fix standards for activities like public relations, management development, human relations, research, and so on. As a result of that, this becomes a huge limitation on controlling. Okay, so the evaluation of work of persons engaged in all these different activities in the organization will be quite difficult. And then we have point number 4, opposition from subordinates. Now, when you're carrying out controlling function, people may be against it. Okay, they may be opposing it because the controlling process is something that is to be done for the workers only mostly. And the effectiveness of a control process will depend upon the acceptability by subordinates. If the subordinates do not accept the controlling process, then it'll become a total failure. Now, why do we need their acceptance? Because they are the ones who are going to be doing the job, right? We're going to be giving them the standards. We're going to be setting the standards for the employees. Okay, so since control interferes with the individual actions and thinking of the subordinates, because of that, they may have some kind of opposition towards it. So it may also increase the pressure of work on subordinates because with the existence of controlling, performance will be regularly monitored and evaluated. So it could be a lot of work pressure upon these subordinates. So these factors are responsible for the opposition of control by these subordinates. And then the last limitation we can see there is difficulty in setting qualitative standards. Now, if it was quantity, it would be quite easy, right? We can measure things in terms of money, in terms of hours, in terms of, whatever methods of measurement you want to do that. But in case of quality, how can you measure quality? It becomes quite difficult. So it is important to note that the setting of standards is possible if the nature of work is quantitative in nature. But if the respective work is qualitative in nature, then setting of standards will be quite difficult. And therefore, the measurement also, you'll need some kind of indirect standard. Okay, so for example, when it comes to measurement of the morale of the employees, okay, measuring the morale of the employees, it is qualitative in nature. Measuring whether the employees are happy in the firm or not, whether they're performing effectively in the firm or not. This is kind of qualitative in nature, therefore it cannot be measured in a direct manner. So in order to measure this, we can do it through labor turnover rate, right? Then absenteeism rate, whether they're coming to work every day, dispute rate, whether they're fighting against the organization regularly. Okay, so all of these can be taken into consideration. As such, we are terming it as indirect measures. So if all these rates have a higher percentage, your labor turnover, absenteeism, dispute, labor turnover means how many people are leaving the job or how many people are being fired from the job. Okay, and then absenteeism, whether they're coming to the job on time or not, and then dispute rate, whether they're getting into conflicts with the organization. Now, if these 3 points that we've measured just now, if they have a high percentage, then it could be said that the morale of the employees in the organization is not high. Okay, so it becomes clear that qualitative standards cannot be set for all of the works, and the qualitative standards, of course, cannot always be true. So because of this problem also, it leads to a limitation in the controlling. Okay, so these are the 5 limitations we can see when it comes to the controlling system.